Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of CNF Talks. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking to Vivienne Artz, OBE, who's the CEO of the FTSE Women Leaders Review, which is the UK's business-led voluntary framework supported by government to improve the representation of women on the boards and leadership teams of the FTSE 350 and 50 of the UK's largest private companies. Vivienne is going to be speaking at our upcoming Women in Finance Summit, which is being held at America Square on the 10th of July. Vivienne, welcome.
Thank you very much, Morris, for inviting me today. Hello.
Our pleasure in signing. The FTSE Women's Leaders Review reflected some impressive progress on the representation of women at the board level of the FTSE 350 and the top 50 private companies in the UK last year. The review is also measuring the representation of women at the leadership level. Is the progress here similar?
Morris, it's an excellent question. And it's interesting to see the very impressive progress that's been made at the FTSE 350 at the board level and the representation of women there. So if we sort of think back to where we started in 2011, about 9.5% female representation at the board level. And then this year in the report, we actually exceeded that on average, which was about 42%. When we look at the leadership data, however, it is different. Now, we haven't been collecting the leadership data for as long as we've been collecting the board data. So when we started in 2017, the leadership data was at 24.5% women at the leadership level, and then this year at 34.5%. So, quite a difference between 42 and 34% in terms of board and leadership. So good, solid progress being made, but a lot slower than what we're seeing at the board level. And then if we unpick that data a little bit, we can see that at the board level, the vast majority of companies are at or above the 40% target, whereas actually we see a bulk of the companies, the single largest number of companies, 115 in the leadership level, are actually below 33%. So there's definitely a much slower progress, but progress nonetheless. Why is it important to separate out the two? It's really about pipeline. If we think about the board level, where do we get those board representatives from? Where's their experience? And it comes from the C-suite in general. And actually, if the leadership level isn't as strong in terms of pipeline, then we will also have a consequent challenge potentially at the board level.
Is part of that differential due to the fact that at board level, some of the representation is at the non-executive director level, and therefore, they're not necessarily, probably not at all, coming from the pipeline of talent at the executive level. And just a further question on that: are those figures that you quote, over 40%, true of executive C-suite members of the board, or are they heavily influenced by the NED portion of the board?
Well, I think what we have seen is an increase in the NED population. And that's part of why we've been focusing on, what are those board roles, and actually have board sizes increased as well? Is that why we're seeing the increased number at the board level? And I suspect there has been, and the data will bear out that there has been an element of padding, shall we say, this surge in NEDs. And so that's part of what we're looking at the FTSE Women Leaders Review, is actually a bit of a deeper dive into what are the key roles in relation to the board and at the leadership level. So where are we seeing the increase in numbers of women, and are they actually in those positions which are influential, which have real impact, and which count?
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, at the CEO level, are the figures, what are the figures like there for FTSE 350? How many women CEOs are there now, say, compared with the 2011 base figure?
So really interesting. What we've done is identified, four key roles in relation to the FTSE Women Leaders Review to
Mm,
reflect what we were just discussing.
yeah,
The chair role, senior independent director, CEO, and CFO. In terms
yeah.
of the CEO, this year we are 21 CEOs,
Mm,
which out of the FTSE 350, I mean, we could seriously wish that there were more. It
yeah.
is up from 15 in 2011, which is
Mm,
good. The chair role, 53, which is
mm,
reflective of the better positioning in terms of the board representation. But actually, that's down from 55 in 2022.
mm,
And then CFO, which is often a feeder role into the CEO, is 48. We've got
yeah.
48 CFOs, again, slightly down from 50 in 2022. But the one where we're seeing a lot of progress is the senior independent director, and that's
Mm,
at near parity now, which is at 47%. So
mm,
it is disappointing that we only have 21 female CEOs in the FTSE 350,
mm,
but we can only hope that that is going to improve. And that's a large part of why we have the review is to
yeah,
track the progress, to shine a light, and then to collaborate with organizations to help understand, what can you do differently? How do
yeah.
we recruit and retain and promote better to improve those figures?
Yeah, because that must be the real challenge, mustn't it? The C-suite, the actual executive level membership of the board, and the figures you quoted for those four key roles, if you take the correlation between those and the senior executive positions that members of the executive committee, yeah, there's still quite a big drop off, isn't there, between the two? And I just wonder what it is that prevents women making that leap from senior executive to a executive member of the board. Are there sort of key factors that are holding women back?
Well, that's a lot of what we're doing when we're working with the educational institutions and various others
Mm,
who are doing the deep dives and the insights. So this data enables us to identify areas where we need to look harder. And
yeah,
we need to look a lot more closely. So, in the report, we've looked at different roles at the leadership level and where we're seeing greater representation of women. So that tends to be sort of legal director,
yeah,
HR, head of people, and so on and so forth. But in those roles where they carry the most influence and such like, and the authority to deliver change, like CEO and CFO, that's where the
mm,
representation is much lower. And I
yeah,
think what's super important is that we understand once you're aware of it, then you
yeah,
can start addressing it. And so, what do we do to better prepare candidates for those roles so that they can
mm,
actually achieve those positions?
yeah,
And then, what are the blockers? So, it isn't all
mm,
about what more we can do to help prepare, but it's also around so, what are the structures and the blockers that are
yeah,
preventing the talent from reaching those positions? Because if we look at all of the 360 review in terms of performance and so on and so forth, there's no difference there. There's no
mm,
difference there. So there must be something else that
yeah,
is causing this interesting divergence in data.
yeah. It's a challenge, isn't it? But when you look internationally, which I'm sure you have done, but how do you see the approach in other countries? In terms of those blockers, are there solutions that you've seen elsewhere that might be appropriate in the UK?
I think it's really important to look what's happening elsewhere, and what we are seeing is quotas in some countries,
Mm,
and quotas have been quite successful. But you need to also consider that the UK has many more companies and many more board members and executives than, for example, Norway or France that have
yeah,
quotas in this space. And what we've done in the review is go beyond the FTSE companies and also now looking at the 50 largest
yeah,
companies in the
yeah,
UK as well on the private sector side. So making sure that we're not focused on just one part of business, but actually
yeah.
looking at all of business to make a difference. And I think I'm super proud that the UK has very effectively held its own. We are second in the world in terms of progress in this space, and we've done that on a purely voluntary basis. So it's supported and sponsored by business, but purely voluntary. So people knowing the importance and understanding the importance of diversity of representation and diversity of thought, and how that can empower British business to be hugely successful.
Yeah, absolutely, which is what everybody wants. And I do think the quotas are simply an admission that you can't work out what the blockers are, you can't do anything about them. It's a very blunt instrument, isn't it? Finally, why do you think it, perhaps just to give the context and the background, why do you think it is particularly important to ensure balanced boards, leadership and overall representation of women in the financial services sector?
I mean, it's an excellent question. It's one of the questions I often get, actually. And I think I tend to reflect on it as it's organic growth versus a strategic approach. And there's some very depressing data points out there. If we wait for change to happen from the bottom up, if we wait for change to happen organically, if we wait for another generation or two, we'll be waiting for another 100 years. Actually, what we really need to ensure that our businesses are successful, that our population is appropriately represented in those businesses, and that they operate effectively, is to make sure that we have appropriate balance at the leadership and at the board level. Another element of this, of course, is that role models are important. There's a saying that you can't be what you can't see, and actually making sure that we get the right representation of women at the leadership and the board level means that we've got those role models that can inspire future generations to achieve their full potential and to take on those leadership roles. And finally, it's in those leadership roles that we can effect change in a much faster way and in a more effective way, if I'm honest. When the leadership get to decide the strategy, the direction, the structure, and the culture of an organization, and with greater diversity in those spaces, we can design better businesses.
And you, of course, Vivienne, are very much one of those role models. And I think all your work in this area has been truly inspiring. But for our viewers, if you'd like to hear more from Vivienne and a host of other excellent speakers, please do attend the Women in Finance Summit being held at America Square in London on the 10th of July. More information is available from the City and Financial website. So it just remains for me to say, Vivienne, thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you on the 10th of July.
I look forward to seeing you there as well, Morris. 10th of July. Thank you.